My name is Deborah Lynn Arnesen, but from the time I was about 5 years old, I was not called Deborah. And the reason I wasn't called Deborah was because there were 7 Deborahs in my kindergarten class. Deborah Sue, Deborah Lynn, Deborah Ann, and my kindergarten teacher went nuts. And so because my last name is Arnesen, which is Norwegian for son of Arnie, she started calling me Arnie. My parents, because of the Scandinavian part of our family, thought that they were going to name my brother Arnie Arnesen. But my Norwegian grandmother came into the hospital as they were about to sign the birth certificate, and she started screaming, going, "Arnie Arnesen? No way! I moved to America so there be no more Sven Svensons, Hans Hansens, Arnie Arnesens. You can't do that." They named him Dwight Ian Arnesen, but instead he was called Arnie from the time he was born. So imagine a young boy named Arnie Arnesen and his sister, who went into the world as Deborah Arnesen, suddenly coming home being called Arnie. So you can imagine the confusion. People would call the house and ask to talk to Arnie, and my mother would have to say, "Do you want the boy or the girl?" And people would say, "We have a choice." That's ridiculous. Anyway. I wanted to be a minister. And maybe the reason I wanted to be a minister is that I felt the need that I had to do good. My father had instilled that in me. I wanted to teach, but I wasn't sure I wanted to be a teacher. I liked to do public speaking. I loved theater. I loved performance. I was curious about history and philosophy. And I always wanted a church with a red door. I went to work for a church in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, and they had a social service agency that was attached to this church in Milwaukee. They'd created this social service agency called the Next Door Foundation, because it was literally next door to the big church, where they were going to serve the local community. That meant the blacks and the Hispanics and the guys that came out of jail and all that other stuff. And I went to work for the Next Door Foundation, thinking that eventually I was going to move into being a minister. I fell in love. So it changed my life, because all of a sudden I realized I didn't want to go to divinity school. This is where I wanted to live. This is what I wanted to do. And then here's the sad story. The sad story is that the director of the Next Door Foundation offered to pay for my master's in social work at the University of Wisconsin at Madison if I would agree to work for them. And I was so proud. They would pay for my degree. It was where I wanted to be. I was beginning to show some signs of success. So I called my mother up, and remember, I hadn't quite graduated yet. And I said, "Guess what? They've offered to pay for my master's. They want me to work for them. I'm so proud." Here's my mother's reaction. "Stop slumming it and come home." Shirley Chisholm was the first black woman congressman from New York. She actually ran for president. And here is this black woman who comes to the state of New Hampshire in 1984 to give a speech to a group of poverty workers, okay? And so for the most part, of the room of 400 people, 98% female, okay? Because most people who work with people who are poor tend to be female, especially back in '84. And she's in this room, and it's at the State House, in the legislative, because that was the biggest room, and it seemed totally appropriate that it should take place there. So here is this woman, just amazing. So if you don't know who Shirley Chisholm is or was, she's unattractive. She has almost huge buck teeth, and she almost has a speech impediment. And she starts talking, and you think, oh my God. And then about 3 or 4 minutes into the conversation, you're swept away.
The hour has come in America when all of us in this room can no longer be the passive recipients of whatever the politics of a nation may decree for us as citizens within this realm. But if we have the courage of our convictions, if we desire to make a contribution, to make this nation bring about the fulfillment of the American dream so that it is meaningful to every segment in America, we will forget what the world will say, whether we are in our place or out of our place.
You're just so moved because she's so freaking brilliant. And I felt like Shirley Chisholm was talking to Arnie, not to the other people in that room. And she was talking about the fact that if you really want to help your clients, then you can't just stay in the job you're in. You've got to do something else. And what she encouraged us to do was take the risk of running for office. We had to. And she said, the reason you have to is you have to bring their voices to the table of power. You have to be there when they write the laws. You have to fight for them on the floor. You understand because you've lived it, you've walked it, you've cried with it. In 1984, I ran for the Constitutional Convention, 7 months pregnant. At the end of the 6 weeks, the Republican majority leader asked me what I was going to do that fall, and I said, have a baby. And then he said, ever thought about running for the New Hampshire legislature? Let me repeat, the Republican majority leader asked me that. And I turned to him and I said, Bruce, I don't know how to break this to you, but I think I'm a Democrat. In fact, I think I'm a liberal Democrat. And he said 75% of what we do in the New Hampshire legislature is about what's good for New Hampshire. 25% of it is partisan. You need to be there for the 75%. And I was. And that's how I started. I was the first woman to run for governor in state history. In 1991, I mean, you won't believe the questions I got asked that Jean Shaheen never got asked. What about your children, Arnie? What about if you have your period? How could you possibly be able to manage? I mean, you would not believe the crap. But here's the good news. I understood where they were coming from, and I handled it with humor, not with anger. And I give this speech about the economy and what I think we need to do to begin to repair it and how we pull the pieces together. So I give my speech, and at the end, people are applauding. They were so excited and enthused, which was a wonderful thing. And this gentleman decides to walk me to my car. And we start talking, and he says to me, that was the most sophisticated economic speech I have ever heard, Miss Arnesen. I'm thinking, good, I'm glad, thank you. And then he says, too bad I can't vote for you. And I'm looking at him going, excuse me? And he doesn't look me in the face, and he looks down at his feet. And he goes, because of that woman problem. I put my arm around him and I said, so I don't know how to break this to you, but I'm having that problem right now. And I said, and imagine if I'm like this at the time of my problem, how am I the rest of the month? I told that story 1,000 times on the campaign trail. Because I knew that there were other people thinking the same crap. And the only way I could bat it out of the park was by talking about it. I'm not going to run away from it. I'm not going to do whatever. I'm just going to handle it. And it's like 2 weeks before the election, I'm speaking at a Chamber of Commerce, and some guy raises his hand and said, excuse me, lady, have you ever held a job? And you watch everybody going like this, you know? And so I'm sitting here and I'm thinking my father would say, be funny, don't get mad. Be funny, don't get mad. Because I'm literally holding the podium and you can see my knuckles are white. So I said, well, actually, no. I said, I woke up one morning and I said, should I make brownies or should I run for governor? If I see these other women running today, I had a role to play in that. Some of us get to open doors. Other of us gets to walk through them. I guess I feel good to be a part of that door. It was 1988, about then. I had been elected to the legislature in 1984, and I was fairly outspoken, but also fairly informed. So there was a talk show host who was based at a little tiny radio station in the middle of a cornfield in White River Junction, Vermont. And he would call me on his Saturday morning show and say, would you come and talk to me about what's happening in New Hampshire about this issue or that issue? And I said, not a problem, I'd love to do it. Well, one day, I get a phone call from the radio station and they said, Arnie, what are you doing next Saturday? I said, I don't know. And they said, can you fill in as a host for us? Because Al Alessi, the guy whose show it was, he's ill and we need someone to fill in. I said, I'm not a fill-in host. And they said, well, what do you mean? I said, I've only been a guest. I've never been a host. And they said, oh, that's not a problem, Arnie. We've been listening to you on the radio. You don't even know this, but you are a host. So I sit down and I'm about to go on the air and I don't realize that my microphone is hot. They've already turned me on. And I look at the board and I go, oh my God, this thing looks like a goddamn cockpit. And those are my first words on the radio. And then in 2009, not only had I just recently lost a job, but I turned out to become the guardian for my almost 90-year-old aunt. And at the same time as I am awarded guardianship for this woman who requires really 24-hour care, my husband gets diagnosed with stage 4 cancer. And a number of people said, you know, Arnie, your voice isn't on the air. We've got to get you back on the air. And what can we do? And this little community radio station opened up. We decided to sort of pool what limited resources we had, and we created a nonprofit, WNHNFM.org, and I agreed to do radio for nothing every day. When my husband was alive, I did it 2 hours every day. And although people think it's a small, community radio station, do we have 12 listeners? Who knows? Do we have 2,000? Who knows? And although I have always been involved in politics, if you asked me, would I rather do radio? I so love radio, but my politics made me a better radio talk show host, and my radio talk show host ability made me a better politician. So there was kind of a synergy there. Thanks to a Republican from Kansas who's basically a shill for Monsanto, and they want to basically make it impossible for any state to introduce GMO labeling legislation. So this is the dark bill that is being introduced today. So how appropriate that we should get the head of for public policy for Vermont, Businesses for Social Responsibility. I think the timing could not be better.
It's perfect.
It is perfect. But what is more perfect, however, is that every day being here makes a difference. It makes a difference for our state, it makes a difference for our community, and it makes a difference in my life. It's a constant education. I feel like I'm getting a PhD every couple of months. So radio is a gift.